Portland Trailblazers are about to enter a full-scale rebuild following Damian Lillard's official trade request a little over a month ago. It signals the end of an era for arguably the greatest player in franchise history and the beginning of something new in Portland as they prepare to move forward with their new young crop of talent between Scoot Henderson, Anthony Simons, and Shaedon Sharpe, plus whatever they get from the Dame trade. A little over 15 years ago, the Blazers were in a similar spot. They had just had a rough season, finishing 12th in the Western Conference, but had a wealth of really promising young talent to build around. They already had LaMarcus Aldridge, Brandon Roy, and had selected a dominant center in Greg Oden with the #1 overall pick in 2007. These three projected to be a dominant big three for years to come, and seemed to have the chance to elevate Portland into the upper echelon of the Western Conference. Maybe in another timeline they did exactly that. But in this one, injuries massively derailed two members of the Big Three, leading to tragically short careers for both of them, as this Blazers era really never got off the ground, leading to one of the biggest what-ifs of all time. Today, we're going to delve into the NBA's greatest Big Three that never was. It all begins in the 2005-2006 NBA season. That year, the Blazers are terrible. They finished with a 21-61 record, the worst in the entire league. It was their second straight season of less than 30 wins, the first two they had endured in a pretty long time because they were just coming off a 15-year stretch of seasons with a 500 record or better, which is really hard to achieve in the NBA. They were a staple of success in the Western Conference, but at this point, it was no longer the case. They had 60-win seasons, then they made conference finals, made NBA finals, but the run of success had come to an end as the 2000s reached their midway point. They did have some interesting young talent on the roster at this point, like a 24-year-old Zach Randolph, a 22-year-old Jarrett Jack, a young Travis Outlaw, and Sebastian Telfair, but none of these players were seemingly the franchise star that they were going to need to get back to the long-lasting success that they had back in those years. However, they would find some prime candidates for this role in the 2006 NBA draft, one that was really important to get them back on track. Unfortunately for them, they landed the 4th overall pick in the lottery despite having, again, the worst record in the league, but they were able to maneuver around a bit and put together a fantastic draft class anyways through some key moves. It began when they dealt Tyrus Thomas, who they selected at 4, to the Chicago Bulls alongside Victor Kriapa, a 23-year-old small forward, in exchange for a second-round pick, and LaMarcus Aldridge, who Chicago had just taken with their 2nd overall selection. He was coming off a dominant sophomore season at Texas, where he scored 15 points per game, grabbed 9.2 boards, and blocked 2 shots a game while shooting nearly 60%. He won the Conference Defensive Player of the Year award, made the All-Conference team, and helped Texas advance to the Elite Eight in the NCAA tournament. It was a great deal for the Blazers, as Aldridge would become eventually an incredible player, while Tyrus Thomas didn't do too much in his career comparatively. But it didn't stop there. The Minnesota Timberwolves selected Brandon Roy at pick 6, someone who is widely considered one of the top prospects, with the plan to deal him over to Houston in exchange for Randy Foye, who the Rockets sought to select with the 8th overall pick, as well as Luther Head. But the Blazers blew the deal wide open, swooping in with their 7th pick and stealing away Randy Foye from Houston, forcing the Timberwolves to deal with them instead if they really wanted to get Randy Foye as bad as they said they did. And so the Wolves' hand was forced. They dealt Portland Brandon Roy and cash considerations, technically just trading down a pick straight up in exchange to get Randy Foye. It was a gutsy move by Portland's front office to go ahead and try and break up that trade like that, but it was one that ended up working out really well for them as they got the far better player in the end. Brandon Roy, coming into the draft, was a 4-year college player who had just put on an incredible senior season. He dropped 20.2 points per game, 5.6 rebounds, and 4.1 assists at Washington while shooting 50, 40, 81 splits as the Huskies made a Sweet 16 run in the NCAA tournament. With these moves, Portland ended up getting two of the best talents in the entire class between Aldridge and Roy, a duo that had a world of potential together, and they would end up showcasing it in their rookie campaigns. For Portland as an overall team, 2007 wasn't a very memorable year. They went 32-50, finished 12th in the West, continuing their streak of sub-500 seasons, but the individual play of Roy and Aldridge was incredibly promising. Aldridge put up just 9 points per game and 5 boards, but he started just a third of games he played in the season and played just 22 minutes per game in those contests due to the presence of more veteran bigs on the roster between Zach Randolph and Joel Przybilla. In his limited run, though, he displayed a ton of interior dominance, the stuff that he showed in college, earning himself an all-rookie selection despite really limited play time. Meanwhile, Brandon Roy was a true standout and the biggest bright spot by far in this not great season for Portland. In his first year, he dropped 16.8 points per game, 4.4 boards, and 4 dimes while shooting 45.6% from the field, 37.7% from deep, and 83.8% from the line. Really high efficiency for a rookie, especially as one that's looked at to be a second option. He was incredible, won Rookie of the Year almost unanimously, just missed out on one first place vote out of the 128, showing that the Timberwolves made a huge mistake dealing him away in the draft, and that Portland got a steal. Even with just this duo of Brandon Roy and LaMarcus Aldridge going forward, the Blazers would have been in a great spot for years to come. But things were just getting started, as the Portland Trailblazers entered the lottery with just a 5.3% chance to secure the #1 overall pick. Yet, they jumped everybody and landed at that top spot. Maybe it was the lottery gods apologizing for the year before, where again they were the worst team in the league, but fell pretty far. Regardless though, it was a miracle for the franchise and provided them with a chance to add another incredible talent to their growing young core. And this year's draft class featured two players that were looked at by many as generational guys. The first one was Kevin Durant, a near 7-foot sniper out of Texas who just averaged 25.8 points per game in his sole collegiate season on elite efficiency. Obviously, KD went on to become one of the greatest scorers of all time, an offensive assassin from anywhere on the court, an MVP, a scoring champ, a multi-time champion, and of course a future Hall of Famer, but Portland didn't end up going with him. Instead, they went with the second guy in this conversation, that guy being Greg Oden. Oden, similarly, was unreal in his lone collegiate season as he dropped 15.7 points per game, 9.6 rebounds, and 3.3 blocks, while shooting over 60% from the field. He showcased elite footwork, ridiculous strength, speed, athleticism, unreal defensive instincts and lateral quickness, top-tier shot blocking instincts. He had some touch, some passing chops, could rebound with the best of them, and looked to be the NBA's next great center. The hype around him was incredible, and for really good reason. If you go back and watch Greg Oden's collegiate highlights, you'll understand why the NBA world was so excited for him to enter the league. In the national championship game, he put up 25 points, 12 boards, and 4 blocks versus a stacked Florida frontcourt featuring Joakim Noah and Al Horford with a broken right hand. Looking back at some of his scouting reports, he was commonly compared to some of the best bigs of all time, like David Robinson primarily, and sometimes I even saw Bill Russell. There are also others calling him the best big man prospect since Tim Duncan, another all-time great big, and Oden was just 19 years old. Steve Kerr in December, which isn't even that far into the season, was calling Greg Oden a once-in-a-decade player. Despite the great play and obvious talent of KD, most mock drafts had Oden going #1 because they saw him as the better player. I found an excerpt from a Bleacher Report article that pretty much sums up some people's argument. This is coming from Kieran Darcy of ESPN, and they said that Oden is poised to be a franchise center, someone you can build a team around. Franchise centers usually win championships. His name's already being mentioned in the company of Russell, Robinson, Olajuwon, and Shaq. A lot of rings on those fingers. Durant is most often compared to Tracy McGrady and Kevin Garnett. Some people project him as a combination of the two. That's pretty darn good, but I don't see any rings on their fingers. Obviously, following this, Kevin Garnett did win a ring, but this was the stance that some people had. It was a legit debate, and most people that I found going back were taking Greg Oden. Looking back with the knowledge they have now, obviously the Blazers would go Kevin Durant, but at the time, Oden was a lot of people's pick to go here. It wasn't a shock, it wasn't a horrific mistake in the moment, it made a lot of sense. So they pick him up, building a big three of Brandon Roy, LaMarcus Aldridge, and Greg Oden, immediately giving them one of the most formidable young trios in the entire sport. However, we unfortunately wouldn't get to see the three of them play together for quite some time. Prior to the season even beginning, Greg Oden's year was over as a microfracture in his knee was discovered and required surgery, which prevented him from playing in what was supposed to be his rookie campaign in the 2007-2008 season. It was devastating for Greg Oden, Blazers fans, and the NBA world in general that was so excited to see this potentially generational big man make his debut. It was the first time a #1 overall pick missed their rookie year since David Robinson, who missed his first 2 seasons to serve in the United States Navy. Obviously, this killed a lot of anticipation for some people for the upcoming Blazers season, but thankfully, there was still a lot to be really excited about. While Oden wasn't playing, both Brandon Roy and LaMarcus Aldridge broke out big time. The Blazers dealt Zach Randolph over to the Knicks, allowing LaMarcus Aldridge to move into the starting frontcourt full-time, where he averaged in his second season 17.8 points per game, 7.6 boards, and 1.6 assists, to go with 1.2 blocks. He was a monster, jumped up about 9 points per game in his new role, and firmly asserted his place as a staple in that future frontcourt. Meanwhile, Brandon Roy built off his spectacular rookie season, getting somehow even better, jumping to 19.1 points per game, putting up 4.7 boards and 5.8 dimes as the new first option for the franchise, earning himself an all-star appearance in just his second season. behind the play of those two, some good seasons from other young players like Travis Outlaw, Martell Webster, Jared Jack, the Blazers far exceeded expectations even without Greg Oden. They went 41-41 despite being projected to win just 30 games. This wasn't enough to make the playoffs since the West was stacked. The 8-seeded Nuggets that year had 50 wins, so it was going to be hard for them to make the playoffs, but it was enough to show what this young core was capable of, even without the year's #1 overall pick playing. Because of all this and the impending return of Oden, expectations for Portland were decently high going to the 2008-2009 season, and they'd go on to have a hell of a year, going 54-28, which was good for the 4th seed in the Western Conference, finally getting back to the success that they had had for a while recently. It started with Brandon Roy, who again improved and built off his previous year, again playing at an all-star level, putting up 22.6 points per game, 4.7 boards, and 5.1 assists on the best efficiency of his entire career. He also earned his first All-NBA selection this year, making All-NBA second team alongside Chris Paul and ahead of Tony Parker and Chauncey Billups, establishing himself amongst the best guards in the entire association at a time when there was a lot of great talent at that spot. LaMarcus again put up about 18 points, 7.5 boards, 2 assists, a block, and a steal, being that consistent, reliable second option behind Brandon Roy night in and night out. As for Greg Oden, it was a really up and down debut campaign. In his first career game, Oden played just 13 minutes versus the Lakers before injuring his foot, which not only took him out of the game, but also kept him out a couple of weeks. When he came back, he came off the bench for a bit, but was still really effective. Over his next 4 games, Oden put up 3 double-doubles, including a 22-point, 10-rebound, 2-block game against the Warriors in just under 30 minutes of action. He'd be up and down over the next month or so, but over a 5-game stretch in January, Oden really put it together, dropping 16.4 points per game, 11.4 rebounds, and 1.4 blocks while shooting 66% from the field in these 5 contests as the Blazers won 4 out of 5, blowing out each one of those opponents. Unfortunately, not long after that, on February 12th, Greg Oden would bump knees with Corey Maggette and missed a month, looking rusty when he returned and failing to record a double-double at all down the home stretch. It was a rough, injury-riddled campaign that ultimately wasn't good enough for Oden to secure an all-rookie spot, but he showed a ton of promise all throughout the year, showcasing high-level defensive potential and the ability to be a future double-double machine. In the playoffs, the Blazers, unfortunately being a young, inexperienced team, lost in 6 games in the first round to the Houston Rockets, a squad led by Yao Ming and Tracy McGrady. But this really wasn't that big of a deal. Of course, they had higher aspirations than a first-round exit, but they were incredibly young, had an All-NBA guard, a rising #1 overall pick big man, an 18-8 guy who projected to be their 3rd best player, and had managed to win nearly 60 games in their first year together in a season where they're also fighting a lot of injuries. They were the #1 offense in the entire NBA in this season, and the 13th defense, a defense that seemingly would skyrocket with a fully healthy season from Greg Oden the next year. This seemed like it was the beginning for the Blazers, a beginning for a team that was going to be a constant staple of that upper echelon in the Western Conference. They were going to have multiple All-Stars, maybe 3 if all guys really caught their stride, be a great offense, be a great defense. This was supposed to be the beginning, but unfortunately, it was more so the beginning of the end. Heading into 2010, expectations again were really high. The Blazers had risen to the 7th highest championship odds out of anybody in the league. Again, this made sense. They were a young team looking to build off a 54-win season the year prior, but things wouldn't go very well for them. It started off great as Roy and Aldridge were again both playing incredibly well. A 21-year-old Nick Batum had become a do-it-all role player. Andre Miller came in as a veteran playmaker, and most importantly, Greg Oden had begun to put it together. In his first 20 games of the season, Oden put up 11.7 points per game, 8.8 rebounds, 1 assist, and 2.4 blocks, while shooting 60% from the field and anchoring Portland's defense at a really high level. Towards the end of that stretch, he put up 15.6, 9.1, and 2.4 blocks over a 6-game span, including a 13.20 board 4-block game versus Miami. Despite Oden's great play, Portland started just 12-8 in those 20 games, but they had a 6-game win streak and had begun to find momentum heading into their December 5th matchup versus the Houston Rockets, a rematch of last year's playoff series, but unfortunately also a game that would end up being one of the most devastating in Blazers history. Just 4 minutes into the game, Aaron Brooks drove and took a floater over Greg Oden, bumping knees with him on the way up, leading to Oden landing kinda awkwardly. Immediately, Greg Oden went down in a lot of pain as the Blazers called timeout and brought out the medical staff, leading to him eventually being stretchered off. He wouldn't play the rest that night. In fact, he wouldn't play the rest of the season as he had fractured his patella, ending his second campaign after just 21 appearances, where it really felt like we were starting to see the flashes of greatness that he showed in college, becoming the generational type player that it seemed like he could be at some point. It was just another heartbreaking moment for him, suffering another monumental setback after putting together the best stretch of his very young career. Now, despite this, the Blazers did still finish with 50 wins. Roy made All-NBA third team as well as another All-Star appearance, remaining one of the best backcourt players in the league. Aldridge had another really solid year, and they were able to make a playoff appearance. However, they were again outmatched in round one, this time against the Nash-Stoudemire Phoenix Suns, again losing in 6 games. Heading into 2011, things would only get worse for the Blazers. Prior to the season, Oden would again undergo microfracture surgery, the same procedure that prevented him from playing in his rookie campaign, again prematurely ending another season of his before it even began. But it wasn't just Oden that faced injuries. Brandon Roy would play just 47 games in 2011 due to knee injuries that required him to undergo surgery and miss much of the year. He returned for the home stretch in the Blazers' lone playoff series, helping them push the Mavericks to 6 games, before again ultimately falling in the first round. Unfortunately, the issues went far beyond just holding him out about half the season, as right before training camp the next year, Brandon Roy was revealed to have a degenerative knee condition that had pretty much removed all the cartilage between his bones and both of his knees. This was a really devastating diagnosis for Roy, who had become a 3-time All-Star, 2-time All-NBA player, and felt like he was on a Hall of Fame path, continuously being one of the best scoring guards in the entire league. It was a diagnosis that was so severe that it eventually led to Brandon Roy announcing that he was going to retire from the sport to preserve his health, a decision that made a ton of sense, but was incredibly sad when you look to the future he could have had in the league. After a year off, Roy would return to play 5 games for Minnesota, but would soon need season-ending surgery on his knee, officially ending his NBA career. It was just such a crushing end for Roy, who had managed to become one of the league's most respected guards in just a few short seasons. Again, recapping his resume, he finished his career as a 3-time All-Star, 2-time All-NBA player in just 5 seasons. Such a ridiculous resume for someone who only played as long as he did. If he hadn't faced these obstacles, I still, again, think Brandon Roy would have ended up a Hall of Famer, and maybe he eventually leads Portland to an NBA title alongside his young co-stars of LaMarcus Aldridge and Greg Oden. But unfortunately, the situation with him will forever be a what if. Meanwhile, Oden would not only miss the entire 2011 season, but he would also miss the entire 2012 season too, after having to undergo yet another microfracture surgery, the third of his very short career. With the injuries piling up, the Blazers would end up actually waiving Greg Oden on March 15, 2012, ending his tenure with the franchise. He would sit the following season as well to focus on rehab before attempting to make a return in the 2013-2014 year by signing with the Miami Heat. With Miami, Oden would play 23 games starting in 6 of them, and he put up 2.9 points per game, 2.3 rebounds, and 0.6 blocks in his 9.2 minutes per game. Not bad numbers. However, this would be Oden's last time appearing in an NBA game. He wouldn't return to the league after this. He tried a return a few years later, but ultimately instead headed overseas to play in the Chinese Basketball Association, where he had a pretty solid 25-game season. Like his teammate Brandon Roy, Greg Oden is another incredibly sad what-if case. He came out of college as a #1 overall pick over Kevin Durant, who was garnering David Robinson, Bill Russell, Tim Duncan comparisons, being called a generational once-in-a-decade prospect. In his short NBA career, he showed such incredible flashes of greatness, flashes that I personally think would have become the norm for him, but instead, he was consistently plagued by injuries that prevented him from reaching this maybe all-time potential that it seemed like he had. LaMarcus Aldridge was the sole member of this big three to go on and have a long career, making 7 All-Star appearances, 5 All-NBA appearances over his 17 seasons. In my opinion, he's earned himself a real shot at one day being enshrined in the Hall of Fame, a spot that I think he's deserving of. He would also have some team success with the Blazers as well, stepping up as their #2 option alongside 2012 draft pick Damian Lillard, who would go on to become an NBA 75 player and one of the best guards of this generation. He also had some team success, some deep playoff runs with the San Antonio Spurs, when he eventually signed there in free agency some years later. All in all, we really never got to see the trio of Greg Oden, Brandon Roy, and LaMarcus Aldridge play together. They were all in the roster for 4 years and only managed to share the court for a total of 62 games in that time. But over those games, the trio was dominant. They went 50-12, a win percentage of 80.6 in those games. And if you stretch that win percentage out over an 82-game season, it's a record of 66-16, which would be one of the greatest regular season records of all time. Sure, the sample size is small, but it just shows how good this group could have and probably would have been. This record also came while Oden was in and out with injuries. They were all still really young. Imagine what they could have been like when they hit their primes, when LaMarcus Aldridge eventually became a Hall of Fame caliber big. Brandon Roy probably also would have been a Hall of Fame caliber guard. If Greg Oden hits his potential and looks like the generational big man that basically everybody thought he was, who's stopping that group? They never had time to build chemistry. They were never able to find a rhythm due to consistent injuries, and they were all outside their primes, yet they still put together a couple 50-win seasons. It's a team that I believe should have been perennially competing for championships, and a team that probably would have won a title with better health. In my opinion, they're not only one of the biggest what-ifs of the 2000s, but one of the biggest what-ifs of all time. It was a team that had unreal potential, a trio that had unreal potential that was just tragically cut short. In making this video, I wanted to do a couple of things. Number one, I wanted to take a look back myself at what this trio could do, rewatch some of their highlights, look at some of the numbers that they had together, because when they were hooping, I was like 9 years old. I'm 23 now. I really don't remember actually watching these guys play together all that much. So this was a great chance for me to go back and really appreciate the greatness that they showed in their limited time together. And secondly, I want to try and convey that to you from what I saw looking into them, just how good they could have been, how talented they were in the moment, and really why this is such a big what if. This team really could have been one of the best teams of that 2010s era. They really had that potential. It's just injuries cut it short. With all that being said, I appreciate you watching. Let me know in the comment section down below how good you think this trio could have been. Leave a like and subscribe if you enjoyed too. And let me know any other historical teams, players, trios, whatever that you want to see me break down over the course of the rest of the offseason. We still have 2 months to go, which sucks because there's really no news going on. A Dame trade could come up at some point, or maybe a James Harden one. I guess we'll have to wait and see. But for now, I want to do more of these historical breakdowns. I mentioned a while ago I want to do an Isaiah Thomas one. That one is still in the works. I'm working on that one. I want to talk about Paul George when he was on the Pacers, John Wall. I want to talk about the 2019-2020 Thunder team. I'm a Thunder fan. That was one of my favorite teams of all time. So yeah, any other ones you want to see, let me know down below. But for right now, appreciate y'all watching. I'll see y'all later. Ray1, say it back.